Hello my student. In this video inshallah we'll start chapter 5, the government macroeconomic intervention. As we studied in chapter 4, the inflation, what causes inflation and the consequences of inflation, whether this inflation is creeping inflation or hyperinflation. Also we covered the balance of payments and what causes deficit or surplus in the balance of payments. We studied the exchange rates and how the fluctuations in the exchange rate may cause deficit or surplus in the balance of payments. So it's obvious now for us that for all the governments they have some macroeconomic objectives which include having stable inflation rate, having equilibrium in the balance of payments, having also controlling the fluctuations in the exchange rate. So this is the main objectives or the main goals for the governments. So how they are going to achieve these macroeconomic objectives? In order for the governments to achieve these objectives, they are going to use some policies. We have three types of policies that we will cover in this chapter inshallah. Let's start with the fiscal policy. We will later study the monetary and supply side policy. So what is the meaning of fiscal policy and how the governments are going to use this policy in order to achieve their macroeconomic objectives? Fiscal policy is how the government is using the government spending and the taxation in order to affect the aggregate demand. Just let me remind you by the components of the aggregate demand. Aggregate demand has four main components: consumption, investment, government spending, and the net exports. So this means that if the government has decided that they are going to use the fiscal policy to affect the aggregate demand, they are going to either, if they want to increase the aggregate demand, they are going to increase the government expenditure. If they want to lower the aggregate demand, so they are going to spend less on the public and merit goods and services. And they are also may use the taxation in order to increase or lower the aggregate demand. If they want to increase the aggregate demand, which we call it expansionary fiscal policy, they are going to lower the tax rates. If they want to lower the aggregate demand, they are going to apply the contractionary fiscal policy, so they are going to increase the tax rates. So if you remember, last semester we have studied three types or some types of the taxes. We have studied the income tax rate, the indirect taxes, and the corporation taxes. Income taxes is the direct tax which is applied on your income. Indirect taxes like the VAT is the tax which is applied on the goods and services. Corporation tax is a type of tax that is applied on the profits of the businesses. So let's assume that the government will lower the taxes. How this will increase the aggregate demand? Lowering the tax on income will make the amount of income that you are having after paying the tax increase, and this will make you demand more from the goods and services. Accordingly, this will increase the first component of the aggregate demand, which is the consumption. Let's move to the indirect taxes or the VAT. How lowering the VAT will increase the aggregate demand? Lowering the VAT will make the goods prices will fall down, and as you know that there is indirect relation between your demand and the prices. Whenever the prices for the goods and services fall, you will demand more from these goods and services. So lowering the VAT will make you demand more, so your consumption will increase, so the aggregate demand will increase. Also, for the corporation tax, lowering the corporation tax will work as an incentive to the business owners in order to expand their businesses and invest more. And as you know that the investment is the second component of the aggregate demand, so increasing investments means that the aggregate demand will increase also. This is for the expansionary fiscal policy, or increasing the aggregate demand. The contrast will go for the contractionary fiscal policy. If they want to lower the aggregate demand, so they will lower the government spending and they will increase the taxes. That will work the opposite as we just explained now. So just to summarize this, you have to know that governments, they have macroeconomic objectives. Some of these objectives is to maintain stable inflation, to maintain equilibrium in the balance of payments, and to avoid fluctuations in the exchange rate. In order for the governments to achieve their goals or their macroeconomic objectives, they have to follow some policies. The three main policies are the fiscal policy, monetary policy, and supply side policy. Fiscal policy have two types, which is expansionary fiscal policy and contractionary fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is the use of the government spending and taxation in order to affect the aggregate demand. If the government aims to increase the aggregate demand, they are going to increase the government spending and lower the taxes. If they want to lower the aggregate demand, they are going to follow the contractionary fiscal policy to decrease the government spending and increase the taxes. This is about the fiscal policy. In the next video, inshallah, we will explain the monetary policy.